Keep it moving, Missy. Seats are for invited guests and family. Standing rooms in the back, behind the rope. Way back. The hand landed on her shoulder before the sentence finished. Firm, practiced. The hand of a man who moved people for a living and had stopped noticing he did it. Sergeant Kyle Renner, United States Marine Corps, 26 years old, turned the dark-haired woman in the plain gray dress a quarter rotation away from the dais and walked her 3 steps toward the rope line before letting go. She let him. That was the first thing nobody noticed. A woman gets turned by the shoulder on a parade field at 0740 in the morning. Most women stiffen. Pull back. Ask a question with their feet. This one rotated like she had been waiting for the pressure, absorbed it, and was already walking when his hand dropped away. No protest, no stumble. One word over her shoulder, quiet as a radio check. Understood. The parade field sat on the coastal edge of a Marine Special Operations compound in North Carolina. 400 meters of cut grass between a flagpole and the bay. 200 folding chairs stood in ranks that would become 400 by Friday. A dais at the north end, skirted in blue. A rope line at the south end, waist high, strung between steel pickets, and behind it, a strip of bare grass the program politely called standing room. Friday, 1000. This field would hold a Navy Cross presentation, the second highest decoration the Navy and Marine Corps can give. And the program in Sergeant Renner's hand listed the guest of honor in 9 letters and a hyphen. Recipient. Name withheld. Name withheld pending declassification review by direction of the Secretary. Renner had read the line 40 times, and it still itched. You could not run a flawless ceremony for a man you could not name. And it would be a man. Everyone on the detail knew that much without knowing anything. A classified raid, a vault citation, 7 years of silence. The rumor mill had built him already. A raider, a breacher, 6 foot something, a beard out of regs by now. The detail had a betting pool. Renner had a checklist. He gathered his Marines at the dais at 0800, 12 of them. Ceremonial detail. Dress rehearsals through Thursday. Execution Friday. Lance Corporal Tyler Mott, 20 years old, stood at the end of the rank with a clipboard he had not been trusted with yet. 4 days, Renner said. Friday morning, there is a lieutenant general on that platform and a vault opening in front of 400 people. Nothing improvised, nothing unlisted. If it is not on my roster, it does not cross my rope. Questions. There were no questions. There was a promotion board in June with Renner's name on the docket, and every Marine on the detail knew the ceremony was his file's crown. And Renner knew, they knew. And none of that needed saying on a Tuesday. The woman stayed behind the rope. She stood through the morning the way fence posts stand. Mott noticed her at 0900 because of where she stood. Not the middle of the standing area, not the shade at the edge. She had planted herself on a single square meter of grass, 40 meters south of the dais, slightly left of the center walkway. And she had been there 20 minutes when Staff Sergeant Van's marking party came through with the survey tape and the little orange flags, and the flag for the color guard's post went into the turf 1 meter in front of her feet. She had found the spot before the spot existed. Mott looked at her then. Mid-40s maybe, dark hair pulled back low. Civilian dress the color of wet slate. Flat shoes, no bag, no phone in her hand. While he watched, she raised one finger and touched it to her tongue, and held it up, and read the wind coming off the bay like a page. Then she looked at the flagpole, not the bunting, the flag, and her lips moved once around a number. Mott. Renner's voice. Rope line isn't a petting zoo. Walk. By 10:30, the Gold Star seating had its first occupant, 3 days early. A woman of 63 in a cardigan the color of oatmeal came across the grass, with a folded program in both hands and a laminated card that said, "Family of the Fallen, Row 1. Her name was Dorothy Ellison. The detail had her on every roster. Mother of Staff Sergeant Marcus Ellison, United States Marine Corps, killed in action March 19, 2019, on an operation nobody on this field was cleared to describe to her. The ceremony on Friday would include a moment of honors for the fallen of that operation. The Corps had flown her in from Ohio, and the Corps had not told her the whole story because the whole story had spent 7 years in a vault. Dot Ellison took her seat in row 1 and looked down 400 meters of grass at a dark-haired woman standing alone behind the rope. Her son used to stand like that. Wait quiet, eyes working, still in a way that wasn't resting. At the dais, Sergeant Renner clipped a fresh access roster to his board and squared the corners. 41 names, everyone verified, everyone seated. And 2 rows above the empty box where a recipient's photograph should have been, the same 9 letters and the hyphen itching at him. Recipient. Name withheld. The afternoon rehearsal broke the citation for the first time at 1400. Captain Joel Hargrove, 33, the battalion adjutant, stood at the podium microphone with the draft citation in a black folder and read it the way officers read drafts, flat, fast, checking length against the band's timing. He made it 4 sentences before the village name took him down. Al-Suar, Al-Swar, he stopped. We'll fix that. 60 meters out, the rifle detail fired the practice volley. 3 volleys of 7 blanks into the gray over the bay. The first volley cracked clean. The second arrived a half-beat late, ragged at the edges, and the third came in pieces. And Staff Sergeant Van said a word into the wind that did not appear in any ceremony manual. Behind the rope, the woman in the slate-gray dress watched the bolts work, not the muzzles. When the echo died, she spoke for the second time in 2 days, quietly, to the only Marine inside earshot, which was Lance Corporal Mott, who had drifted to the south rope with a crate of water and his unworthy clipboard. Al-Suwar, she said. Soft on the R. Tell your captain. Mott blinked at her. Ma'am? The village, in the citation. She nodded at the rifle line without taking her eyes off the field. And the volleys drifting, because they're counting off the command. 3 volleys, 2-second interval. Counted off the bolt, not the command. The bolt doesn't get nervous. Mott looked at the rifles, then at her. How do you know that? Heard it done right once. That was all. She stepped back from the rope, and Mott stood there for 11 seconds doing the math a 20-year-old does when the math is above his pay grade. Then he carried the water and the 2 corrections 400 meters north and offered them to Captain Hargrove the way you hand somebody a found wallet. Hargrove tried the pronunciation twice, marked the citation with a pencil. Where'd that come from? A guest, sir, by the rope. The volley detail tried the bolt count at 1530. 3 volleys, 2-second interval, clean as stapled paper. Staff Sergeant Van looked at his own rifles like they had been swapped out while he wasn't looking. Sergeant Renner heard all of it from the dais steps, and what he heard was not a clean volley. What he heard was a spectator coaching his detail through a lance corporal. He crossed the field at a walk that other Marines stepped out of, and arrived at the rope with his hands behind his back and took stock of her. 40-something, civilian, composed in a way that read to him as rehearsed. Press, maybe, one of the ceremony hobbyists, someone's aunt with opinions. Ma'am, appreciate the enthusiasm. Spectators don't coach my detail. Copy, she said. Copy. Not okay, not sorry. He filed the word without knowing he had filed it, and held her eyes a second longer than he meant to, 'cause something in them was level in a way that did not match the dress or the rope or any roster he owned. Then she looked back at the field. Done with him, the way you're done with weather. Walking back, Renner stopped at the orange flag 1 meter in front of where she stood, the color guard's post, surveyed and taped that morning. He looked at her square meter of grass. He looked at his roster. In the margin, in block letters, he wrote, "Unlisted female, recurring." He underlined it twice. The woman crossed the gravel apron at 1600, leaving for the day. And that was when Dot Ellison saw the limp. It was nearly nothing. The stride shortened on the left every fourth step, a centimeter of hitch, machined down by years of discipline into something you would only catch if you had spent 3 days watching a field with nothing else on it. The woman paused once, leveled a leaning tent stake with the toe of her flat shoe, and walked on. Pain kept time with her, and she had stopped negotiating with it years ago. That was how it looked from row 1, though Dot Ellison would not have phrased it that way. She would have said, "That woman has been hurt and has decided not to be." Dot watched her all the way to the gate, the way she returned the sentry's nod with exactly the right depth of nod back. Wednesday morning, the detail had a name for her. "Rope lady's back," said Corporal Diaz at 0630, dropping the tent flap. The detail tent smelled of coffee and starch and the particular anxiety of ceremonies. "Same spot. I'm telling you, she's press. The raid's declassified. The vultures can smell it. She's building a story." "She's a groupie," said another corporal. "Metal chasers. They show up at these like ring camps. My cousin works ceremonies at the yard. He's got stories." Lance Corporal Mott, who had not slept well, said, "She fixed the volley." "She interfered with the volley," Renner said from the front of the tent, and the tent went quiet. He let it stay quiet while he clipped the day's roster to his board. "Whoever she is not on my roster. Pass the rope is the whole policy. I don't need her story. I need her behind the rope. We clear?" They were clear. Battalion was less clear at 0900. Renner's gunnery sergeant cornered him by the dais generator with the gentleness of a forklift. The lieutenant general's office had called twice about Friday. The board met in 3 weeks, and if one tent stake on this field was out of plumb, the gunny intended to know the name of the Marine who owned that stake. 4 days became 3, Renner. Flawless isn't a goal, it's a floor. "Nothing improvised," Renner said. "Nothing unlisted." "That's a good sentence. Put it on your headstone." The freeze-out happened without an order, the way freeze-outs do. The water point moved 40 meters north, out of polite range of the rope. The seating brief convened at the dais, the far end of the field, where no spectator could hear chair counts. Mott was told, without anyone exactly telling him, to find work away from the south rope. By 1100, the woman in the gray dress stood alone in standing room, like the last person at a bus stop on a discontinued route. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything else. At 8:59, she checked her watch, and her lips moved. 0900 colors. 1 full second before the recorded bugle cracked across the field, and every Marine froze to attention. A civilian behind a rope, calling the time hack early. Nobody saw it but the woman in row 1. Dot Ellison crossed the grass at noon with 2 paper cups of coffee, because in Ohio that is what you do about a person standing alone. "They've got you penned up like livestock," she said, handing one through over the rope. "I'm Dot." "Renata." The coffee changed hands. The woman's grip turned the cup so the seam faced away from the drinking side, a tiny mechanical courtesy. "Thank you, ma'am." "You family of the man getting the medal?" Dot asked. "Friday." A pause you could have missed. "Close to it, ma'am." "My son was on that operation," Dot said, and the words came out level because she had had 7 years of practice. "Marcus. Staff Sergeant Marcus Ellison. He didn't come home from it. They're doing honors for the fallen on Friday. That's why they flew me in. 7 years this spring. And you know what they've told me about how it happened." She held up her free hand and made a 0. "A vault knows. I don't." The woman called Renata listened the way Dot had not been listened to in 7 years, completely, without flinching, without rushing in to upholster the silence with comfort. Still, the way her son used to be still. "He'd have liked it here," Dot said finally, looking at the bay. "He liked anywhere with wind." "Yes, ma'am," Renata said. "He did." Dot turned her head. But the woman's face had already closed, polite and level. A door clicked shut so softly you couldn't be sure it had ever been open, and Sergeant Renner was already crossing the field toward the rope, with his hands behind his back, because from the dais it had looked exactly like what it was. The unlisted female, recurring, talking to his Gold Star family. And if you have ever stood on the wrong side of a rope while a man with a clipboard decided what you were, stay with this story. Tap subscribe, because Friday is coming, and the roster has no idea what's missing from it. Renner ran the badge at 1300 Wednesday. The access office occupied a beige room with 2 computers and a laminator, and the corporal behind the desk owed Renner a favor of the small, permanent kind. The visitor badge for Marchetti, R. Issued Monday at the main gate. Photo of the dark-haired woman looking into the camera, like the camera worked for her. Came up on the screen with its sponsor field, and Renner leaned in and read it twice. Sponsor. Office of the Commanding General. No point of contact. No phone extension. No escort assigned. No event code. No aide's email. None of the connective tissue that real sponsorship dragged behind it. Renner had processed 200 VIP visitors in 3 years, and Lieutenant General's offices did not sponsor lone women in gray dresses without paperwork, the way the ocean did not skip a tide. "That's a clerical error," he said, "or somebody talked a clerk into a field they shouldn't have. You ever see a CG sponsor with no POC?" The corporal had not. The corporal also knew the box on his screen that said, "Downgrade pending verification," which existed for exactly this conversation, and which Renner was, technically, within his lane to request for an unverified ceremony-adjacent guest. The box got ticked at 1309. The printer hummed. The new badge said, "Overlook access only," and the overlook was a grass mound 80 meters southwest of the rope line, built so the public could watch ceremonies the way you watch weather on a coast, present, distant, harmless. He delivered it himself at 1340, because a thing worth doing was worth doing in person. "Ma'am, pending sponsor verification, your access is the overlook. The mound, southwest. Better view than you'd think." She looked at the new badge for 1 second. Understood. The word again. He walked away with the old badge in his cargo pocket, and the feeling, small, dismissible, dismissed, that he had just been graded. From 80 meters, the field shrank, but did not close. At 1410, with the rehearsal formation at parade rest and the bunting on the dais skirt lying dead in the heat, the woman on the overlook shifted her stance, shoulders a quarter turn into the southwest, feet reset, like a sailor feeling a swell nobody announced. 30 seconds later, the gust came off the bay, hard and flat, snapped the bunting loose from 2 staples, and put a corporal's cover in the grass. She had not been watching the bunting. She had been watching the flag at the top of the pole, the only honest wind gauge on a parade field, and the flag had told her 30 seconds before it told anyone else. By then, Dot Ellison was walking to the rope to find her, and found instead Sergeant Renner, who arrived on an interception course with his hands behind his back. "Ma'am, Gold Star seating is reserved and escorted. Your guest will need to watch from the overlook." "My guest," Dot said, "is the only person on this base who talks to me like I'm a person and not a folded flag, Sergeant. I invited her. And I'm responsible for who sits where, ma'am." He said it gently. He believed it gently. That was the thing about Sergeant Renner that the field would remember later. There was no cruelty anywhere in him, only a roster, and a rope, and a promotion board in June, and a certainty as smooth and load-bearing as poured concrete. The field belonged to the names on the clipboard. Dot looked at him for a long moment, 63 years of Ohio in her face. "You know what my son used to call men your age with clipboards?" "No, ma'am." "Temporary," she said, and went back to row 1. It was Lance Corporal Mott who carried a folding chair up the overlook mound at 1500, on no order, against the grain of the day. He set it down beside the woman and didn't quite look at her. "Long afternoon, ma'am." "Thank you, Lance Corporal." She read his name tape and his 20 years in one pass, and something at the hinge of her jaw eased by a millimeter. She did not sit. She moved the chair 11 inches left and angled it, and it took Mott until he was halfway down the mound to do that math too. From row 1, Dot Ellison now had her afternoon sun cut by the chair's shadow line. The rope lady had retasked his chair as shade for a Gold Star mother, and had not sat in it, and Mott had now watched her for 2 days, and had never once seen her sit. That night, Renner worked his checklist by lantern light in the detail tent. Every box ticked in the order the boxes wanted. Chairs, 400. Program proofs, approved. Volley detail, recertified at the 2-second interval. He initialed that box without letting himself think about where the interval had come from. At the bottom of the page, in his block letters, one line waited unticked. Verify sponsor Thursday. He looked at it, decided Thursday morning was soon enough, and killed the lantern. He never got to it. Thursday began at 05:30 in a motel room 9 miles inland, where Dot Ellison sat on a flowered bedspread with a shoebox she had carried from Ohio in her lap. Because at her age, sleep negotiated, and this week it had stopped negotiating. The box held her son in paper, boot camp letters, a coin, a folded unit patch, 4 photographs. The one she was looking for sat third from the bottom, mailed in 2018 from a place his letters were not allowed to name. 6 figures against a tan wall, kitted, faces angled away from the lens the way their world required. Half a team caught between one thing and the next. 5 shapes you would call men. And at the left edge, in profile, a woman. Dark hair, pinned low under a helmet's absence. Jaw set level. One hand resting on the buckle of her kit, the way other people's hands rest on banisters. On the back, in Marcus's terrible slanted hand, 11 words. The boss. "She'll bring me home, Ma. Don't worry so much." Dot held the photograph under the lamp for a long time. She carried it to the field in her coat pocket and climbed the overlook mound at 0900, while below them, the volley detail rehearsed, and the woman called Renata stood watching with her lips moving. Counting, Dot realized. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Counting the silence between volleys like a metronome that had buried its share of the people it kept time for. At 0940, a medevac helicopter tracked up the coastline, gray against gray, and the woman's eyes went to it before the sound properly arrived, and she said one word to nobody. Casualty bird. Not chopper. Not helicopter. Dot Ellison had been a Marine's mother for 11 years and a Gold Star mother for 7. She knew unit language when it fell out of a person on reflex. She took out the photograph. She looked at the profile on the left edge, and the woman beside her watching the bay, and the bay light did the rest. "Did you know my son?" The woman went still, not startled, Mill. Her stillness simply changed gears, and that itself was an answer. She turned. She looked at Dot Ellison straight on, the way the photograph could not. "Yes, ma'am." "Were you with him?" Dot's voice stayed level. 7 years of practice. At the end, "Were you with him?" "The whole way." 4 words, and her thumb crossed her left hip once, an unconscious half-inch of motion over the place, where, though Dot could not know it, a surgical scar ran 9 inches under gray cotton. She offered nothing further, not because the door was shut. Dot understood this with the specific clarity grief installs, but because what stood behind the door would not fit through it on a Thursday morning with the volley detail counting. Below them, at the base of the mound, Sergeant Renner had stopped with a coil of rope line on his shoulder. The wind brought him pieces. Your son, at the end, the whole way. He stood there while the picture assembled itself in him. Wrong. The unlisted female, recurring, sponsor field doctored, now working a gold star mother, the softest target on any ceremony field, for access or quotes or whatever vultures came for. His ears went hot. The promotion board, the lieutenant general, the vault, his rope. He turned downhill and went to find base security, and the certainty in his chest felt exactly like duty, which is the oldest trick certainty knows. If you can already see Friday coming, you're ahead of everyone on this field. Subscribe, because a citation reads better when you know who's standing behind the rope. Renata Marchetti walked back to her own motel at midday and bolted the door and stood in the quiet. On the bed lay a garment bag she had not opened since Monday. On the desk sat a flat blue presentation case, sent ahead by an office that did such things. Empty, its felt bed waiting for Friday. Beside it lay the letter, read to fatigue. Request your presence, by direction of the secretary. Recipient's name withheld until presentation. And a program same as 400 other programs, except for what only she could read in it. Recipient. Name withheld. 7 years, and the vault had finally opened, and what walked out of it had her name. March 19th, 2019. 0240 in the morning, northern Syria, a compound outside a village called Al-Suwar, soft on the Uri shore, that held 23 people who had been somebody's leverage for 106 days. Her element hit the east wall at 0241. She was 34 years old, a captain, 9 years in, 4 as an element leader, and the breach went the way 1,000 rehearsals had built it to go. Gate, courtyard, strong point, doors. 11 minutes. 23 hostages moving in a daisy chain of zip cuff cuts and shoulder taps, out through the east wall toward the vehicles, and her people flowing room to room ahead of them like water finding grade. The secondary charge was the one nobody called. Old ordnance, maybe, or a dead man rig, or just the building deciding. The report spent 4 classified pages not knowing. The floor above the east room came down at 0252. The building made the decision for everyone in it. She remembered the noise as pressure, not sound. She remembered the slab across her left hip and the geometry of it, that the hip had taken what the spine was offered. The hip broke in 3 places. She remembered learning later the phrase comminuted fracture and thinking the Corps had finally found Latin for what rubble does. Staff Sergeant Marcus Ellison, 29, was under the bigger piece. They got it off him, 3 of them lifting at a count, and the litter teams were loaded with hostages, all 23 out and breathing, which was the math of the night, and would remain the math of the night forever. So she carried him. 200 meters to the casualty bird on a hip held together by adrenaline's paperwork, his arm over her shoulder, and then not over her shoulder, so much as draped, the weight changing meaning as it went. On the bird, he found her wrist. Tell my mom it was for something, he said, at altitude, over a dark coastline. He died 11 minutes out. The flight surgeon called it, at 0331, and she sat with her hand flat on his chest until the wheels touched, because the hand could no longer do anything else and refused to do less. 7 years she had spent deciding whether it was. For something. The hostages went home, all 23. She kept a folded count of them in her head, the way Renner kept rosters. The citation got written by people who were there and read by almost no one. Secret stamped over her name. The raid, the village, the count, the carry. Walter Reed rebuilt the hip in 2 surgeries and 11 months. They promoted her to major in 2020, in a hallway. No field, no volley. In 2021, a medical board retired her at 36, 14 years in, and the Marine Corps thanked her in a conference room with the blinds down. Then this April, a letter. Declassification review complete. The country was finally allowed to thank its own, the general's office said. And would she come to a field in North Carolina? And would she forgive the program's 9 letters and a hyphen? Security preferred the name stay sealed until the citation was read aloud. She had come 3 days early and alone for one reason, and it was not rehearsals. It was so she could stand on the grass where they would say Marcus Ellison's name on Friday and get her face right before they did. The face needed work in private. It had had 7 years of practice and still needed work. She zipped the garment bag zipper down 2 inches, looked at what hung inside without letting the room see it, and zipped it shut. Then she set the alarm for 0430 and slept like the field at night. Flat, quiet, and full of orange flags where things would stand tomorrow. The full dress rehearsal formed at 1600 Thursday, and it looked like Friday wearing Friday's clothes. Dress blues by the rank, colors cased and waiting. The band's truck on the gravel apron, the lieutenant general's advance team walking the dais with laser levels, and the expressions of men who measured things for a living. 400 chairs now, every rank dressed to a string line, and Sergeant Renner moving through all of it like current through a wire, checking, squaring, owning. One variable remained on his field, standing on the overlook mound in a slate-gray dress. He had spent the morning building the case in his own head, and the case had good bones if you never tested them. An unlisted woman, recurring, 4 days. A sponsor field with no point of contact, which in his 200 VIP visitors had never once been clean. Corrections passed to his detail through a lance corporal, someone who knew ceremonies from the inside, the way a journalist who worked the military beat would, or one of the stolen valor people who studied this world in order to wear it. And now, fragments on the wind. A gold star mother. The softest target on any field. Your son. The whole way. Building rapport. Working an angle. On his field. 3 weeks before his board. He collected 2 base security Marines at 1620 and climbed the mound with his decision already made, which is the only way he made decisions. Ma'am. The word came out courteous and final. Your pass is suspended, pending sponsor verification. These Marines are going to walk you to the gate. Don't make this a thing. It won't be. She unclipped the badge herself and handed it to him. Handed it, not surrendered it. The distinction visible to everyone present and nameable by no one. Then, as the security Marines turned her toward the long walk down the rope line, she paused and looked once at the flagpole, the flag standing off it stiff to the southwest, and then at the dais. Volleys into the wind tomorrow, she said, to Renner, the way you leave keys with a neighbor. They'll need the count. The walk-off ran the full south rope, 400 meters of it, in front of the formed detail and the rifle party and the band unloading its truck. Marines watched sideways, the way Marines watch everything they are not supposed to watch. In the Gold Star row, Dot Ellison came up out of her chair with the photograph, hand pressed flat against her coat pocket, and her jaw set for war. 63 years old, and one good shout away from a federal incident. And the woman in the gray dress, without breaking stride, met her eyes and shook her head. Once, a half inch each way. let it go. Dot sat down the way artillery stands down, still loaded. Lance Corporal Mott studied his boots until the gravel apron took the sound of her steps. Nobody on that field said a word, and the rehearsal went on, and it went perfectly, which Renner would remember later as the quietest part of the whole catastrophe. At the gate, she took back the suspended badge from the sentry's tray. They would hold it for verification, the procedure said. And she looked back at Sergeant Renner, who had followed his escort down at 30 meters of supervisory distance. And she smiled at him. Not a victim smile. Not anger banked. Not the brittle politeness of the publicly humiliated. It was unhurried and complete. The smile of someone watching a junior Marine execute a flawed order flawlessly, and it lasted 2 seconds, and asked for nothing. Then she walked out through the pedestrian gate into the late light, and was gone. Renner stood there with the rope-line afternoon collapsing slowly in his chest into a shape he didn't have a name for. "Why do I feel like I just stepped on something?" he said. The security Marine next to him, a corporal with 8 years and 2 deployments, watched the gray dress cross the parking lot. "Couldn't say, Sergeant. But I'd find out before 10:00 tomorrow." That night, 21:50, Renner finally typed the email his checklist had been waiting for since Wednesday. To Bois, Office of the Commanding General, ATTN Protocol, request verification of visitor sponsorship, Marchetti, R, badge suspended pending confirmation. He read it twice for tone, and sent it at 21:52, and felt the day square itself. The reply landed at 2200, 8 minutes. From a lieutenant general's office, after hours, 8 minutes. Guest is verified at the highest level. No further action required or authorized. See you at the ceremony, Sergeant. He read it 11 times. It did not change. Highest level. No further action authorized. Authorized. A word with teeth in it. See you at the ceremony, Sergeant, which was either a pleasantry or the sound of a vault door starting to swing. And at 2200 hours on the last night of his old life, Sergeant Kyle Renner genuinely could not tell which. Friday came in hard and blue, the kind of coastal morning that makes flags look government issue. 0 wind at dawn, then the southwest breeze arriving on schedule like it had read the program. By 09:30, the field held 400 guests. The band, the colors, a rifle detail counting silently off the bolt, and a dais skirted in blue beneath Lieutenant General Harold Dunleavy, 57, 3 stars on each shoulder, and a reputation for ceremonies that started on time. Renata Marchetti arrived with the morning crowd, on foot, in a plain dark dress, and the sentry at the pedestrian gate checked her badge and found it reinstated, sponsor verified, and waved her through with no more ceremony than a nod, which was how she wanted it, and possibly the only thing all week that had gone exactly as she wanted. She did not go to the seats. There was a seat for her, as it happened. There had always been a seat for her, front row center, the one chair on the field with no name card. But she walked past the seating ranks, down the east side, all the way south, and took up standing room behind the rope. The exact square meter. Where he had put her. By choice now. There is a kind of arithmetic that only settles if you stand in the same place twice. Renner saw her at 0940, and his stomach performed a maneuver not found in any drill manual. The email sat in his pocket, printed, because paper had always calmed him, and last night nothing had. Verified at the highest level. The woman the highest level verified stood behind his rope in standing room, and there was nothing in any of his rosters about what to do when the two facts touched. He went over. Of course he went over. It was his rope. "Standing room, ma'am." He heard his own voice come out careful. "Appreciate it." "It's a good spot," she said, and looked at the dais down the long axis of the field, and something in the way she measured that distance made him feel, for the second time in 2 days, accurately graded. 1,000. Colors. The anthem rolled off the band and out over the bay. 400 people on their feet, and then the chairs took them back, and Lieutenant General Dunleavy stepped to the microphone with the morning stretched tight as the string lines under the chair ranks. "Some citations," Dunleavy said, "wait in a vault until the country is allowed to thank its own. This is one of them. 7 years ago, on an objective I spent 5 of those years not being allowed to mention, an element of Marines did something that the people in this business measure everything else against. 23 civilians are alive because of 11 minutes. Today, the vault is open. Captain Hargrove, Captain Joel Hargrove stepped to the podium with the black folder, and the field went to that particular silence that exists only outdoors, the silence with wind in it. In the Gold Star row, Dot Ellison sat with her hand inside her coat pocket, flat against a photograph. The rifle detail fired the honors volley for the fallen of the operation. 3 volleys, into the wind, 2-second interval, counted off the bolt. Clean as stapled paper. Her count, fired into her wind, for her dead. Hargrove opened the folder. "Attention to orders." 400 people stood. "The President of the United States takes pride in presenting the Navy Cross to Major Renata Marchetti, United States Marine Corps, retired." The name landed on the field like ordnance, with a delay fuse. 1 full second of nothing, while 400 heads did the math, and the math came back female and retired. And here, somewhere, presumably. And then the rotation began. 400 chairs, 1 rotation. Programs turning, necks craning at the front rows where a recipient should rise. Finding no one, the front row's 1 empty chair sitting there like a question mark. And then a voice from the rifle detail, or maybe the band, somebody young who would never admit to it, said it out loud for everyone. The rope. She unhooked the rope herself, lifted the steel clip off the picket, laid the line down gently in the grass, like something that had done nothing wrong, and walked onto the field. 400 meters, the full axis, south to north, alone, in a plain dark dress with no insignia, no escort, nothing in her hands. And she let them see the limp. 3 days she had machined it flat in front of these people. Now she walked on the truth, the stride shortening on the left every 4th step, hitch and recovery, hitch and recovery. The cadence of a hip that broke in 3 places under a falling building in a country most of the crowd would never see. And the field, understanding nothing yet, understood it completely. Hargrove kept reading. The citation walked north with her. On the morning of March 19th, 2019, compound in the vicinity of Al-Suwar. 23 hostages, with complete disregard for her own safety. Structural collapse. Refusing evacuation. Carried a wounded Marine 200 meters under enemy fire after sustaining injuries that would end her career. Dot Ellison stood up first. She did not know the protocol and would not have used it. She stood because her body stood, the photograph out of her pocket now and pressed against her chest, the boss in profile against a tan wall. "She'll bring me home, Ma." And the rest of the Gold Star row rose with her, and then it jumped the aisles. The veterans in the crowd came up by instinct, row by row, 1s and 2s becoming dozens. Old men with unit caps locking their spines. A woman in a wheelchair near the aisle pressing herself up on her armrests. Nobody commanding any of it. Nobody able to stop it. The band did not play. The field stood itself, in pieces, in waves, for a limping woman in a civilian dress, while a captain read the longest sentences of his career into the wind. Sergeant Kyle Renner stood post at the south rope, 6 meters from the gap she had walked through, and his face did what faces do when a roster collides with the truth at speed. Confusion, First, a name. That name. The badge name, Marchetti R., refusing to mean what it now meant. Then disbelief, blank and total. The rope lady. The rope lady. Then recognition, arriving not as one fact, but as an avalanche of them, every stone with his fingerprints on it. The spot she found, before the marking party flagged it. The volley count, Al-Suwar, soft on the R. The flag, not the bunting. Casualty bird. The sponsor field he had overruled with a checkbox. The whole way, ma'am. The walk to the gate, in front of the formed detail, his hand on her shoulder. Keep it moving, missy. And then horror, which on Sergeant Renner looked like absolute stillness. His clipboard went loose in his fingers. He caught it and locked his body to attention. Heels, spine, chin, eyes front, because the position of attention was the only correct thing he had left, and he held it, like a man holding a rope over his own drop. At the dais, she came to a stop in front of Lieutenant General Dunleavy, who had presented many decorations, and never one quite like this, to a woman in a dress the color of a working morning. The citation ended. Hargrove closed the folder with both hands. Dunleavy took the Navy Cross from its bearer, a flat blue case, open, the bronze cross on its bed of felt, the blue and white ribbon folded above it, and pinned it to plain civilian cotton, taking the time to set it straight. "Sorry it took 7 years, Major," he said, off the microphone, just for her. "It took what it took, sir." He stepped back and saluted her, a retired Marine, a civilian dress, and a 3-star general holding the salute, the extra half-second that turns regulation into meaning. She returned it with textbook geometry, the first salute she had rendered in 5 years, and from the dais, she looked back down the long axis of the field, past 400 standing guests, to the south rope, to 1 square meter of grass behind it. 400 people followed her eyes to the spot where a Marine had sent her to stand, and the spot, being grass, said nothing, and everyone understood it anyway. The ceremony broke at 1100 into the loose, bright wreckage of all big mornings. Chairs scraping, the band casing instruments, clusters of guests orbiting the dais at respectful radii, while photographers did arithmetic with light. And Sergeant Kyle Renner walked the long way around all of it, found Captain Hargrove at the staff tent, stood at attention, and reported himself. He did it by the numbers and spared himself nothing. The rope, Tuesday, the hand on her shoulder. He included the hand. A lesser man wouldn't have. The badge downgrade on his own initiative, the manufactured suspicion, the security escort in front of the formed detail, the gold star interference. He offered no mitigation, cited his own authority limits accurately against each overstep, and finished with the only sentence available to him. "I request to be relieved of ceremonial duties pending whatever action the command considers appropriate, sir." Hargrove looked at him for a moment, and then past him, because the recipient of the Navy Cross had walked up behind Sergeant Renner with a Gold Star mother on her arm, and had heard most of it. "Captain," Renata said, "I'd like the sergeant as my escort for the rest of the day. He runs a tight field." It took Renner 3 full seconds to understand the sentence had been about him. Hargrove, who understood it immediately, found something urgent to initial. They walked the south rope line 20 minutes later, recipient and escort, while she shook the hands that needed shaking, and he managed the orbit of guests with a clipboard he was holding, like it had recently been returned to him on probation. At the quiet end of the rope, by the pickets, he stopped. "Ma'am, there's no excuse. What I did. You did your job, Sergeant." She said it without softness and without heat, the way range instructions are read. "You had a roster and an unlisted guest and 4 days of risk, and you moved on what you could verify. The roster told you what I wasn't. It couldn't tell you what I was. She looked down the rope line, at the laid-down rope, at the square meter of grass. Next time someone stands in the right place without being told, ask. That's the correction. One question, Tuesday morning, and you'd have had 4 days of the easiest duty in the Corps. Yes, ma'am. And then, because the whole man was being rebuilt that morning, and some of the new parts were honest. Why'd you let me? The gate. You had a phone number that ends wars, ma'am. One call. Because the field needed to run, and you were running it, she said. And because being right early is loud, being right on time is quiet. I had 7 years of practice waiting for Friday. One more Thursday was nothing. Before the detail dismissed, she stopped them. 12 Marines in dress blues, formed by the gravel apron, and stepped in front of Lance Corporal Tyler Mott, 20 years old, who locked up so hard his collar creaked. This Marine, she said, loud enough for his sergeant and his sergeant's sergeant, saw a stranger standing in the right place and asked the question instead of making the assumption. He moved a chair for a Gold Star Mother's Shade. He relayed 2 corrections that fixed your volley and your citation and took the friction for it. She looked at Renner, then back. You asked. That's the whole skill. The Corps will teach you everything else. Hargrove made a note. Renner, beside him, said quietly, I'll second that, sir. The first repair, laid in by hand. If this story found the part of you that has ever been right with no one watching, leave a comment with what you would have said at that gate, and subscribe, because there is always another field, and somebody on it is always standing in the right place without a roster to prove it. The field emptied by 1800, chairs stacked and strapped, string lines wound, the dais skirt folded into its box, 400 programs gone home in coat pockets, to be kept for reasons their owners couldn't have stated. The light came in low off the bay and turned the cut grass amber, and the flag at the top of the pole stood off softly to the southwest on schedule. 2 folding chairs remained, side by side, at the south end of the field, behind where the rope had been, on the square meter, on purpose. Renata Marchetti sat in one of them, sat, finally, the first time the field had seen it, with her hip telling its long story and the flat blue case open on her knees. Dot Ellison sat in the other, the photograph in both hands now, out in the light. He took this, Dot said. Marcus. He wasn't supposed to, I'd bet money. He wasn't, Renata said. He did a lot of things he wasn't supposed to. He was usually right. She looked at the bronze cross on its felt. Then she said the sentence she had carried 200 meters and 7 years, the one that had ridden a casualty bird at altitude over a dark coastline, his hand on her wrist, 11 minutes out. He said to tell you it was for something. The wind moved over the field. Dot Ellison looked at the medal, and at the woman who had carried both the medal's reason and her son, and her face did not break. It settled, like ground after a long thaw. It was, she said. It is. Behind them, at the flagpole, the evening detail began retreat, and the flag started down into the waiting hands of 2 Marines. Both women stood without being told, one from a lifetime of bugles, one from 11 years of being a Marine's mother. And the field held the 2 of them, and the folded light, and the wind off the bay, and asked nothing further of either of them. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.